Christopher, you have created an ingestible battery that is safe to swallow. What materials are you using to make this possible?
Our material selection process here was really focused on designing and inventing materials that are going to be biocompatible and have the same kinds of functions as a battery. So what we've been able to do is basically take melanin pigments, which are the same pigments in your hair, in your eyes, and your skin, and essentially reconfigure that natural material into electrodes as part of an aqueous battery.
And so why melanin though? Because there are many other materials that you could have chosen. What makes melanin the best product to be able to use in the battery?
The reason why we focused on melanin is because it has some very interesting protective functions in the body. So you and I know if we stand in the sun, right, our skin becomes darker. And so that's melanogenesis happening in response to that UV radiation. But melanin can also bind and unbind metal ions. And so it's really the combination of that kind of protective ability and binding and unbinding metal ions that we can basically program into its functions as a battery electrode.
How long does it last in the digestive system though, and what happens when it breaks down?
So there's basically two kinds of timescales that we consider. The first timescale is how long does a battery actually stay active as a battery? And so that can range between 10 to 100 hours, depending on the size and the discharge rate. The other question is how long will that battery persist in the GI tract? And so if it transits the GI tract normally, it should be in the body for about 10 to 30 hours. In the case that the device and the battery get lodged at some point in the GI tract, the battery will persist for about a few weeks, and then it'll break down and then disintegrate.
How does it survive though in our stomach? Because there's a lot of acids in there, and are there any side effects?
Melanin is a really interesting material because unlike things like proteins or other kinds of polymers, which may degrade in low pH environments like the stomach, melanin actually becomes more stable coincidentally. So while it transits the stomach, it's actually a more stabilized form. And then once it reaches the small intestine, it sort of relaxes to its more neutral form and can perform its discharge functions.
And so what about regulatory requirements? What's it going to take for this to be widely adopted? And what about, I mean, even from an insurance perspective, how does it get incorporated into the process?
In terms of regulatory processes, there are a lot of materials that are already regulated as ingestible. And so these are classified as generally recognized as safe. And so there's all kinds of food additives and other kinds of coatings and pigments that are used in foods primarily. And once they're classified as safe, then they're essentially approved for that application. And so we think that the regulatory path for an ingestible battery based on an ingestible pigment, namely melanin, would perhaps follow a similar kind of path. And so that's what makes it exciting because it's essentially a lower regulatory barrier to approval.
Thinking about it just from an everyday person's perspective, it might seem a little bit hard to swallow, pardon the pun, when somebody says, hey, here's a battery, could you swallow this? How do you get around that? Is it just simply education and then eventually acceptance?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I think it's also linked to the potential benefits, right? So if we can maybe deliver drugs more effectively, maybe we can deliver drugs in a very smart way to a specific part of the GI tract where they can manage their diabetes more efficiently, or maybe we can deliver bacteria to certain parts of the GI tract where we can modulate their microbiome, and then maybe we can address issues of obesity or metabolic health. So I think if we can showcase the upside, then there'd be more amenable to ingesting a material which is, let's be clear, is actually part of their own body themselves, melanin.